Oh, I am unmuted. Perfect. Sure. Welcome, everybody, to our Issues Committee this morning. We are fortunate to have with us Harry and Dan. Dan is the chair of our committee. We want to thank AT&T this morning for sponsoring this. That's fantastic, and we really appreciate that. Exciting news on the chamber front is it looks as though as early as Monday, we may be moving to phase two, which includes a number of different things. Phase two guidelines say that all vulnerable individuals should clearly still continue to stay in place, but we can have gatherings of up to 50 people as long as we're using social distancing measures and have appropriate screening in place. We also can continue to encourage telework, as you notice with Rebecca and myself, and if Christy were videoed up, you would see half of us are in the office and half of us are at home, and so we are adhering to those standards as well. But the exciting thing is in phase two that schools and organized youth activities like camp can resume. And so for the parents that have their kids crawling on them 24/7, there will be a lot more congregate activities that will be allowed, as well as bars. And so although restaurants with bars components in them have been at 25%, and those have been open, those businesses that are just bars can start to open. That again, we'll watch for that announcement. The governor could make that as early as Monday. But we saw barbershops open this week, and so things are slowly starting to come back to normal. It's all been data driven, and so much so that I know that the even the folks inside the governor's administration don't know exactly when he's going to announce it, because he just watches all the charts. He watches the charts of infections, hospitalizations, capacity for those that could go into and need to go into a hospital. And so once all those meet a 14-day sliding metric and it's down, 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 when that hits, he then decides we'll go to the next phase. And so that's how he's been deciding phase one and barbershop opening, and he'll decide phase two. And so that'll happen when that happens, but it's all really good news for the business community to get back up and running. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Dan Lopez, our chair of issues. Dan, take it away.
Thanks, Jason. Very exciting about phase two opening up. I, for one, can't wait. It can't happen soon enough. Welcome, everybody, to our issues event here. This is a new virtual series that we're offering to all members of the Seminole Chamber. Normally, these types of meetings are discussed during our monthly meetings. We meet on I think it's the second Friday of every month. And but we wanted to, during this time when we're kind of forced to do this social distancing and not being able to meet in groups and everything, we wanted to be able to kind of open this up to all the members of our chamber. So welcome, glad to have you. And yeah, so far what we've been able to put out so far is we put out a virtual segment on real estate issues, on affordable housing, on our own Tina Calderon gave us an excellent school update. We touched a little bit on the internet sales tax, and now getting ready to talk about lessons on working from home from our own Harry Ellis, the Vice President of Next Horizon. So take it away, Harry.
All right, thank you very much for everybody for joining in. Let's share my screen here to kind of bring up a PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll kind of get started. So first, I want to kind of go back a little bit. Everybody can see the PowerPoint, correct? Okay, great. So I want to kind of go back a little bit about some stats that happened from when we first started. So Next Horizon is a technology company. We have three main practice areas. We have internet, digital marketing, IT managed services, as well as with cloud computing, as well as application development. So what we saw moving into phase one of the quarantine was within 48 hours of the governor and the government basically announcing some type of stay-at-home strategy, 75% of our businesses moved to 100% remote work, while only 50% of those businesses used to work remotely on an occasional basis. So what that meant for us from a technology standpoint, to give an idea, we went from having 2 or 300 networks that we managed with probably 200 to 300 sites to over 30,000 sites. So if you can imagine a couple of hundred employees per location, and then now they're all working from home. So now we've had to manage everything from somebody's home wireless network to their printing at home, scanning at home, and being quote unquote what all the HR departments want is fully productive. So as you can imagine, that put a lot of stress on us initially when this work from home strategy kind of started. Then we started talking with, obviously executives started going to this 100% work from home, but the HR management and compliance were still concerned about their specific departments. So HR was mostly worried about obviously productivity, and compliance was concerned about security, and if they were a healthcare organization, or a financial organization, their actual governmental compliance. Some additional stats: 65% of businesses believe that productivity was down or is down during this time, and we're talking about executive levels, while 80% of their employees think their productivity is better when they're working from home. So there's a vast difference between executive and managements of what they define productivity is, as well as what their employees perceive their productivity level on. So what we did is we kind of started doing this think strategy. So we did a think strategy internally, but we're also encouraging a lot of our our businesses that we're working with to start this think strategy as well. So we started this a long time ago, but we needed to think and redefine what productivity meant. A lot of businesses, when we first started this work from home strategy, was they thought productivity was them working at a computer from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And then they wanted a technology solution to manage that while they're working from home. Well, I said, well, what happens when schools close? That changes the time of productivity. Well, then if you think about school closures, a time of productivity, what if it's a single parent versus a parent with infants versus a parent with elementary school age children versus high school, or every different combination between had a significantly difference of their ability to provide productivity between a quote unquote normal business hour. So what we recommended to a lot of our businesses is to apply and define a different methodology of productivity. Before you even look at how to monitor it, look at how you're going to measure it. So what we use, and this is what we've defined internally, and a lot of our businesses actually enjoy this, is we utilize a Scrum process or an agile process in software development. So what we do is there's a defined product owner or a Scrum Master for a specific product, or this could be a specific team manager. They define a list of tasks that need to be developed in a sprint. So that could be a 1 week or a 4 week cycle. It could be a 2 week cycle, however you want to define that. You have a sprint planning meeting. So your team meets, whether it's a Zoom conference call or a team meeting, or however you meet, whether it can even be through email, and you plan out those sessions. And then you bring those items into a backlog. So in other words, you have a list of items that you want to accomplish in 4 weeks. And then you have a Scrum Master, a defined person that's almost like a traffic light manager. And I'll show you some examples here where that traffic light person basically moves things along into the sprint process. You develop and complete your work, and then you start this process over. So what we defined is we don't care when the employee actually is productive. All we care about is the finished work or the outcome. So you can, if the employee wants to work till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and that's when they're productive, then that's what we really care about, is actually the delivery of the product. Now, obviously, if you're in a service-based business, so this will only work for our web staff and our application development team. Our service-based businesses still have to work that 9 to 5:30 Monday through Friday, but we've actually had to extend those hours because more and more businesses applied this dispersed productivity our timeline. We've had employees, our customer employees, work to midnight till 9 a.m. or start at 6 a.m. and then end at 9 p.m. So that extended our regular IT service hours, our normal service hours, which are 9 to 5:30 Monday through Friday, and emergency hours after. Well, we had to start spacing that out for our product, or for our support staff, because we had to start supporting staff that worked or that could help these individuals later in the evening. But what we can do when you have this kind of process is there's a couple of different tools. One is Monday.com. It's a great tool that kind of dips your toe into a project plan kind of formula time tracking traffic light system. So it has different color codes based upon if something's a blocker or waiting on a customer, or able to start work, and you're able to track your time accordingly. And you can kind of, from the traffic light manager, can see how things are going on. But you can assign different tasks and move items up and down, define dependencies, and you kind of look like a board that looks similar to this, very visual. You have team tasks where you can say what you're going to find this week or next week, and the team member can say, hey, they're working on it, they're done with the task, or they're stuck, or a blocker, or so forth. We use a product called Jira. So our board looks a little bit different. So we have a board that looks like swim lanes. So basically, depending on the task, you will have different elements of ownership. So pending means they haven't been able to finish the work, or they haven't started it. Blocker means there's some type of task that's blocking them, whether it's a client, whether they need additional information. Active means they're currently actively working on it. Rework means we go through a QA process, and obviously when the QA person comes back and says, okay, hey, we need to tweak a couple different things, it gets dropped into that swim lane. Failed or in PO, or failed QA, PO review. So this is when we have again, failed quality assurance check, or a product owner which doesn't meet the spec. We drop those items in there. Then when things are in QA or a project manager's swim lane, things fall into here. PO acceptance is obviously product owner acceptance. Waiting on client comes into a waiting on client, and then PO accepted and resolved is kind of our statuses. So what we do is we apply that same methodology of Scrum into this. So we'll go through a product backlog and sprint planning meeting today at 3 o'clock. We will apply what we think we can get done in our 2-week sprint. Our Scrum Master will assign those tasks, assign values to them based upon their level of effort. And then we allow our staff to work the sprint as whatever they want to do. So only thing that we really care about is the outcome in the actual end of the sprint. So when we come back to defining what productivity means for us, is really, it gives the flexibility of our staff for being remote if they do have school-age children, or let's say they are sick and they want to take a couple of hours to go lay down and have that headache. They have the flexibility of doing that, but still applying that productivity. Then you've heard some of the larger organizations like Twitter saying they can stay at home forever. Google said they're not coming back to, I think they're not coming back for a year. Facebook is the same. They're not going to come back for a year. So then it becomes what happens for tools and policies going forward. Most of us adjusted to this pandemic very quickly. We are putting a lot of trust in our employees to make sure that they're meeting their Zoom calls and they're meeting some type of productivity level. But if this becomes the new norm, what does that mean for security? What does that mean from IT standpoint? Well, I can tell you right now, IT then becomes a security disbursement. If you think about it, if you're a banker or if you're in any type of major security environment, your PCs and the items and the servers that you're working on are usually protected not only at the endpoint at the PC, but they're also protected at a firewall or a corporate firewall level. Well, now if we're dispersing that, well, you can't expect every employee to buy a $8,000 firewall at their home. So what's going to happen is the endpoint device is going to be having to be monitored and more secured. So does that mean, do we allow a bring your own device kind of scenario where we allow our employees to bring their own device? Or do we allow and basically assign devices from corporate down to their down to the end user. So these are other items that I'm listing, which I'll show you a couple of different examples, is what I think that you're going to start seeing being deployed over time from an HR standpoint and a productivity standpoint. And what they do, I'll bring up a couple, is they'll do time tracking. They'll take screenshots of what the employee is doing on the machine. They'll do monitoring on their devices as far as phones usage, is assuming that obviously it's a company provided phone, web app usage, and provide reporting to HR to find out if they're actually being productive when they're saying they're being productive. It will also give automatic time, automatic time billing abilities. So Toggle is a prime example. Well, which will happen is this will actually do all of those things that I was just talking about, but also apply billable rates to your staff and integrate into accounting softwares to actually bill that time accordingly, to make sure that whatever you're billing to the client is actual time used, not someone surfing the web. Rescue time is another prime example. This one's actually a pretty good one, because what they're doing is they want you to, they're giving advantages to the employee of saying, okay, here's your productivity time, the 3 to 4 hours. You have some distracted time of an hour, but we also want to have that coffee break or that downtime that it will actually pop up if you work too much. So if you set threshold at, let's say, 4 hours, it'll tell you to go take a break. But it will also tell you during this distracted time. So if you're supposed to be working in that 3 to 4 hour mark, it'll actually pop up on your screen and saying, kind of a reminder of saying, hey, should you be going to YouTube right now? Is that part of your productivity? Is that what you should be doing right now? So it kind of gives a reminder to the employee. And it also will do the same thing with screenshots and your mouse movements to make sure that it's actually tracking productivity. So I think what you're going to start seeing is a lot more of those items being deployed, especially if the work from home strategy is going to be long-term. But with that, you're going to have to develop policies and procedures. A lot of things that we saw is there was no policies and procedures from a true work at home environment. What we saw was a people trying to adapt their flex time schedule, or the, hey, I've got to work a half day at home schedule, to a work from home strategy, and it doesn't work. And the reason why it didn't work was because your hardware, your businesses that had significantly investments in hardware at their office and not cloud computing, they didn't have enough licensing available for remote work. Half of their software didn't work in a straight VPN or a straight remote technology solution. So what we saw was a lot of our cloud customers, customers that depended on infrastructure as a service, cloud computing, software as a service, those industries or those businesses were able to adapt their policies and procedures very quickly. While we still have a lot of businesses that are still adapting policies and procedures, even right now, to meet their need of their current software and their current solutions that they have invested in their hardware at their physical facilities. So as you're going through some of this, we developed a thing called Think Ahead. So Think Ahead is during these downtimes or these off times when you're trying to figure out, okay, hey, I've got some downtime right now. I'm waiting on a client because maybe they're dealing with other things as well. This is when you should spend your time of updating your budgets, your risk plans. Well, obviously, like I said, your policies and procedures. Establish your work metrics for tracking the progress of your productivity and of your staff, and figure out and considering outward-facing initiatives like the chamber, the Zoom, making sure people know that you're still a bit in business and you're still planning on being in businesses, and this is how you're going to help them going forward. Then obviously during quiet time, we always in retrospective. So we implement a thing called a retrospective during our sprint planning. So after a sprint, we apply a meeting. It's a 1 hour meeting called a sprint retrospective, or a think back meeting. So what we do is we look at things, what went well. So what went well for us this past year or this past sprint? Why didn't it work well? Did we follow all of our policies and procedures to be able to make sure our sprint was effective? So make sure that as we go down this, it's not only just, hey, work from home, plan all the work, but also think back and have your teams come back and say, okay, well, what went well? What did not go well? And then figure out ways to make that transition to working well going forward. So then we applied this thing called Think Deep, which is a plan to dive deep into the systems that you currently have in place. So again, this is the spring cleaning kind of elements. Let's look at things that you already have that aren't effective now in this work and remote workforce. We have a lot of companies that have very big on-premises QuickBooks files. Well, that doesn't work very well in a VPN environment. Okay, so let's look deep into the organization. Let's clean up those drives. Let's clean up those document storage facilities. Let's clean up those software packages and figure out ways and plans to transition those into what productivity is going to look for us going forward. Because I think as what you're going to see going forward is you're going to see now a forced remote workforce, where previously it was a nice to have. I think what's going to happen going forward is it's going to be a necessity. I think it's going to be a necessity not only for, as what we saw from the pandemic, is what if this happens again? Businesses aren't going to have their pants caught, below their knees again. We're going to have a plan and a strategy going forward to, if it's not a pandemic, if it's something else, we're going to have a strategy going from work for 100% workforce from home. And what does that look like? So this is your chance as businesses moving forward to kind of clean that house up and saying, okay, what didn't work well? Now let's move forward to make sure that this works well and we can deploy a remote workforce 100% going forward. And then we also apply this thing called a think across, which is brainstorming ways that each department or each team member can help other teams. You lose the culture element when you're kind of remote workforce. So you can't have that cup of coffee or that water cooler kind of environment of saying, hey, I come up with this issue. What can you kind of help me with? You kind of go into this little silo mode. So we encourage, again, during sprint planning, retrospectives, and all of this stuff is to think across. How can Department A help and brainstorm efforts in Department B? And that also applies towards productivity. It could be the fact of, hey, I just watched this cool training video that may not necessarily apply to my IT staff, but the concepts do. So again, that the thinking across from your colleagues and your workforce to making sure that they're still being collaborative with each other is very, very important. Figure out ways that they can still work together, whether it's a team training. Again, we do the same thing. We have an hour of team training for each department, and it's actually open to all departments, where the team training, it kind of rotates around where one person picks up a topic, and we do a team training around basically a virtual roundtable of how to do X, Y, and Z, or why this X, Y, and Z product or service is better than another product. So it keeps that thinking across the board, making sure our teams are staying productive and thinking outside the box. Then as business owners, we got to think growth, right? So after coming out of this economic issues, we got to start thinking about how do we make sure our sales staff or us as business owners are going to grow either in the pandemic or outside of the pandemic. We had a company that we work closely with doing digital marketing that actually grew their business almost $600,000 by just thinking at a different strategy. They're a metal fabricator. They changed their methodology to change from a metal fabrication of a certain product over to hand sanitizer dispensers. So they grew a completely different product line out of this pandemic, and it's growing extremely rapid. So they again started thinking about growth. So rather than just sit at home and saying, okay, what's my sales cycle going to look like out of the pandemic? Start thinking about how you can change your business model to apply lessons learned in your current organization now. Again, Encouraging employee growth during this time is very important. Encouraging them to watch TED Talks, podcasts, publications, be on Zoom meeting. Make sure that they're doing, getting comfortable with software that they're not maybe normally accustomed to. Microsoft Teams, Skype for Business, obviously Outlook, Zoom, GoToMeeting. There's a lot of people that have never done a video conference or had to do a video conference before the pandemic. So they also had to do a lot of learning on the fly. So with that, this is a great opportunity where, especially in the service-based business, where there may not be, 40 hours of exact work in a week, but we can employee growth by making sure that they're taking those certifications that they never had time to do, or watching those video webinars. So that way, when we come out of this, that employee is actually more valuable to you because they now are trained in a new product or service that you can now offer going out of this pandemic. And obviously, we don't want to think, we want to think about well-being. Again, going back to the think across is having discussions about boundaries in work and non-work zones and share ways that teams can stay focused in a non-office setting. We did hear from a lot of our staff, as well as a lot of customer staff, is they're not able to stay focused at home. They were able to get that 2 or 3 hours, but then they were getting distracted. So give encouraging, keep that recognition and highlights of employees that are able to make those efforts. Try to extend what you would normally do for an employee that's meeting those goals, to kind of encourage those other employees that come up with that same kind of level, but also remind staff to keep communicating with each other. There's a lot of businesses that do virtual happy hours. I know the chamber had a virtual happy hour, kind of make your own cocktail kind of thing last night. But you can also do that with your own staff. Do a virtual happy hour. There's no work discussion whatsoever. It's just catching up and how they're doing. It's that whole, what they miss out from having lunch with their staff to grabbing that coffee in the morning or grabbing that beer in the evening. Keep that interaction with each other. Because I think one thing that we all have forgotten is the mental health element. We're social people. We need that socialization, and if you start removing that, certain pieces of us will start kind of drifting off. I noticed it with my son, and I'm sure other people have noticed it well, that when you're working with people and you're communicating with people, whether it's through whatever technology that there is, your health and your happiness has also kind of improved as well. And you start seeing that, I think, in phase one. You're seeing a lot of people out, especially at some restaurants outside, and they're happy. They're happy again. You went from the social media grumbling to now they're out and they're eating lunch at a restaurant outside, and you see them and they're a happy face again. So I think that keeping that well-being when you're in that remote workforce, that remote office space, is very, very important. And then now, obviously, think now. As phase 2 and phase 1 is coming around, what is your phase 1 plan? What is your phase 2 plan? What is your phase 3 plan? Drafting up announcements and communication. Here's your time to, especially now, especially if you're a business that's outward facing, is to let your customers know about what you're doing to protect not only them, but your employees. Here's how you fix, making sure about sanitation. But if it was a different element, think about what you're doing now, the content on your websites. If you stopped advertising during the beginning of the pandemic, you know what? This is the time to start doing it now. Because what you need to do is brainstorm to think about what your clients are going to need when this comes, when the phase 2 and phase 3 comes out. Gyms are starting to open, restaurants are starting to open. How do people know that you're open for business? You want to make sure that if gyms open on Monday, that your clientele know that gyms start opening on Monday, so that way they can start paying their monthly recurring retainers. If you're going to start allowing people inside your restaurant on Friday, or you're going to start offering happy hours, this is the time to let people know. Don't let people stumble upon it. This is to let people know. It's always better to turn people away than it is to have your booths empty. So right now is the time to start communicating and making sure that your on-site employees know what they're ready for, to make sure that your customers know what they're ready for, and draft up those communications and announcements and start brainstorming with your staff on how they can provide unique value to the clients. So I think I just ran through that really quick, but I'll kind of look and see if there's any questions. I like the way Harry thinks. Update your employment policies and procedures. Yes, that is a very good statement, because we really everything always falls on the IT guys. So it's kind of funny. So once that stay-at-home order kind of happened, everybody came to their IT staff and say, "How do we do this?" Because everybody was quick to do it, but how do we do policies and procedures? How do we make sure that we're doing telehealth correctly? How do we make sure that we do keep our security and procedures and keep our content that's invested into the company secure? Well, unfortunately, when this pandemic happened, it was too late. I think we made do, and I think we did a great job from a Next Horizon standpoint for our clients. But I think what showed really was that we as businesses weren't prepared for a 100% work from home, and we didn't know how to do it. We didn't, and we're making do. And I think we've done a great job in the small business environment for making do. But I think from an overarching, we weren't prepared. I think the organizations that had fully adapted cloud computing was 100% prepared for this scenario, or if they weren't prepared for it, it was a very easy transition. Because if you think about cloud computing, those policies and procedures applied right over with cloud computing, because it didn't matter with cloud computing. It doesn't matter where you really connect from. So really, what we did is we only tweaked policies and procedures that were necessary for home networks rather than creating full new ones. So I think from that standpoint, I think you're going to have to look and kind of retrospect and say, okay, what worked right, what didn't. Let's apply those policies and procedures and making sure that technology matches those. Because it's one thing to have policies and procedures, but if you don't have the technology that matches those policies and procedures, it's kind of pointless. No more questions?
Well, Harry, I wanted to say thank you. We at the Chamber were forced into this world because we really, as a business, if you think about our business, we make a lot of money by aggregating or congregating people. Well, when that doesn't happen, now we are forced onto these different platforms. And so not only do we have Zoom, but I've got WebEx and I've got Microsoft Teams and I've got Google Meetup and Skype and you name it. And they all kind of work like this. And they're not complicated. They're all set up to be totally intuitive. It's like going to an airport you've never been to before. If you just read the signs, you'll figure out how to get to ground transportation. The difference is, if you've never done it before, it's scary. And you already have a work plan to deliver, and now you're working from somewhere else. And so the analogy is kind of like being too busy driving to stop and get gas. It's silly when you put it in the context of being a car, but in doing your work life, it's very similar. That if you're so busy trying to deliver, you're using these old antiquated tools that aren't cloud-based. It could be so much easier if you just took a day to learn the new stuff that's out there, or the stuff that others have been using for a long time. So this is
there's so much free stuff.
helpful.
I mean, there's so much free stuff. And someone asked me a question, well, where are some good data speeds for internet at home? Internet's cheap now, guys. So, I mean, if you think about it, think about like when broadband didn't come out, right? It was DSL. I think ISDN lines were a hot thing in like the mid 90s, and you bonded them together and it was like $300 a month and you got a meg of internet. So now, I mean, you can get for $75 a month from Spectrum or Charter or AT&T or with their fiber, you can almost get any speed that you want for whatever you can afford. And the benefit of it is almost every speed that's offered now from a broadband perspective should be able to do whatever you can do from home. Now, that being said, if your children are in the other room streaming a 4D Sonic the Hedgehog on 2 different TVs, and then you're trying to do a Zoom meeting, your wife's trying to do a Zoom meeting with like 18 other people, and then you're trying to run your cloud desktop also streaming another video, well, then obviously that's when your bandwidth constraints are obviously going to start taking into consideration. So I think the amount of bandwidth that you need, you have to just put it in proportion of what is going all on at the same time. The other thing is what some people do is they buy a whatever, the highest speed possible from whatever service provider that they have, but they all have wireless devices. And then the wireless router that they have is the slowest wireless router that is, basically on the internet or available to buy at home. So for example, let's say you buy 100 meg service from a service provider, but the wireless equipment that you have is only able to run 52 meg per second. So now with wireless, again, same thing with your internet, it's split. So all the devices that you connect to are basically sharing that bandwidth, the same thing that comes with wireless. So if you're only able to connect to 52 meg per second, well, and you have a service provider giving you 100 meg per second, well, you're only going to be able to pull 52 meg. So making sure that your home networking equipment has the same capabilities as your as whatever service provider that you have is very important, because we see that a lot at the office of, hey, I'm subscribed to a 500 meg service, and then as soon as we get on, they have a 8-year-old wireless router that's not even able to give them 500 megs of service. And then somebody else also asked a question, does encryption data pose an additional burden on the speed? It can. So if you have a VPN, so in other words, to get all of your data for your PC to run its software, and you have to do a VPN to your main office, that VPN usually has will have some sort of limitation. So if you have a 500 meg service and you're VPNing into the office, odds are you're not going to get 500 meg of throughput. Okay, you might get 50 meg of throughput, and that's most likely because 2 or 3 reasons. Number one, maybe your the host facility, so the facility that's actually housing those files have a bandwidth limitation, or the hardware that you're using and the encryption that you're using has such an overhead, because obviously as data comes in, it's encrypting going out, and then when data comes back, it's unencrypting coming back in. The overhead will actually slow you down as well. Best wireless routers from working from home. Okay, so that's going to be a very difficult question to answer, because it also matters what equipment that you connect to. So there are a lot of different ACE wireless devices out there. Netgear's got a Nighthawk. Ubiquity's got a great product line. Linksys, obviously Home Routers, has a great product line as well. But if your laptop itself, or whatever you're connecting with, doesn't connect to have the latest technology, it's a two-point pronged scenario. So the best wireless routers are going to be probably the most expensive. You're looking at probably a $200 or $300 wireless router. You're going to want to look for the latest standards, which is going to be wireless ACE. There's a new wireless standard coming out here shortly, so you're going to start seeing a big push for that. But if your laptop can't connect on an ACE service, then again, you're limiting your whole wireless environment down to the slowest speed. So wireless environments work off of the slowest device that's connected to it. So there's like 15 different connections. There's G, N, ACE, ACI, all these different variations of different connection points. If you have a legacy device, like a legacy laptop that's connecting on G, well, guess what? All of your devices are going to connect to G, because it's always going to connect to the slowest point. So it's a shared wireless environment. Then what they've done is they've come out with what you've seen is multi-band or multi-radio wireless routers. Again, those are going to be the most expensive side. And what those give the ability to do is your legacy devices will connect to radio A, not slowing down radio B. So really, the simplest way for consumers to look at it, I hate to say it, but cost does matter. The higher the cost in a wireless router, most likely what that's going to do is, as you look at it, it's going to hold more standards, have an extra radio. But if you're really looking for the most throughput, you're going to be looking at $200 to $300 for a wireless radio to be able to have those high speeds and be able to stream 4K, on TVA and then TVB, maybe HD, as well as having all of the other technology abilities for your other devices. So, hope I answered that question. But they're all good. I mean, as long as they meet the standards, the newer standards, you'll be fine.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Routers being a mature industry, that at this point, cost usually equals quality, like anything else that are mature industries. It's hard to find a really good deal on something when there's a ton of competition in a mature industry like that. And it sounds funny to say wireless routers are a mature industry when I remember a corded telephone where you couldn't walk 10 feet away. So, any other questions for Harry? We want to thank Harry and AT&T very much for hosting or putting on the educational component today. It really just kind of opens your, everybody thinks they know their job, they like what they're doing, it's no problem, and then something like this happens and you got to rethink everything. And so this is a nice way to kind of regroup to let folks know what's out there, especially all the free tools that are out there that can help you with project management, help you with management of employees, or help understand what a manager may be asking of you at some point. I know the ability to see screenshots and what I'm working on doesn't thrill me, but if I'm going to be working at home, that's probably an expectation that I need to have. So thanks to everybody and for being here. Rebecca, did you want to talk about whatever programming that we want to discuss for next week that's coming?
Sure. So we've got a couple things coming